Hi there. On this day, the Olympic Games returned after 12 years of war and interruption. Here is the story.
In the summer of 1948, the Olympic Games returned to London. It had been 12 years since the world last gathered for a summer Olympiad. The last time athletes stood together on this scale was in Berlin, back in 1936. The Games planned for 1940 and 1944 were swallowed by the Second World War. By 1948, Britain was a victorious nation, but an exhausted one. The war had drained the country physically and economically. This 1947-1948 ration book shows the daily reality for British citizens. The stamps for basic items like cooking fat reflect the severe limits placed on sustenance during the recovery. Deciding to host the 14th Olympiad was a massive gamble. The city agreed to welcome the world while its own people lived through the acute shortages of a post-war economy. The nickname Austerity Games described the restraint required to organize the event. There was no budget for a lavish rebuilding program. London used the facilities it already had, centering the Games at Wembley Stadium amidst the city's industrial landscape. Competitors from around the globe were housed in military camps and schools. This dormitory setup shows athletes sitting on standard military-style cots, with their travel trunks serving as their only storage space. Supporting these delegations required a massive logistical operation. Kitchen staff, drivers, and stewards managed food and transport, while working within the strict limits of national rationing. Preparing the facilities depended on manual labor from the existing workforce. Here, workers in blue overalls manually sweep the stone steps of the stadium to prepare for the arrival of the crowds. The Olympic tradition survived that year through the resilience and discipline of ordinary citizens completing thousands of practical tasks. On July 29th, the public began to arrive. Long, dense queues formed along the London sidewalks as thousands of eager spectators made their slow way toward the Wembley Stadium. Families traveled by bus and the underground, passing through the stadium turnstiles and climbing toward the terraces as officials made their final checks. The stands filled to capacity. After years of air raids and enforced separation, a crowd was once again packed shoulder to shoulder. Down on the field, athletes from around the world were organizing into lines for the Parade of Nations. In the summer of 1948, an international crowd finally gathered for a shared public celebration. The athletes formed up behind their national flags, entering the arena one after another to march around the track. 59 nations took part. Their delegations stood in distinct tracksuits, forming a unified presence on the stadium field. Behind the pageantry, many competitors had spent their prime years in military service or waiting for international sport to return. King George VI addressed the stadium from the royal box and officially declared the Games open. The final torchbearer entered the stadium, running the track before pausing beneath the words of Baron de Coubertin to approach the cauldron. The Olympic flame was finally ignited, its fire burning brightly above the thousands of spectators who had gathered in the stands. Lighting that flame signaled the end of a 12-year interruption. The Games had returned. The athletic trials began immediately. Runners, jumpers, and swimmers pushed their physical limits, testing themselves against the best athletes their countries could send. Inside the stadium, events followed strict measurements and recorded times. But outside these walls, the environment remained far more precarious. The Olympics did not solve the consequences of war. Across Europe, cities were still being rebuilt, and new political tensions were already beginning to surface. In Britain, the daily struggle for supplies continued. Food rationing remained in effect throughout the Games. The 1948 Games demonstrated that international frameworks could function again, despite deep global fractures. Athletes from competing nations shared transport and dining areas, interacting through agreed rules rather than violence. The London Games are remembered for their modesty. There were no extravagant buildings, only the practical effort required to make the event possible. This official report documents a moment where organizers and athletes chose to restart their tradition without waiting for full economic recovery or total global harmony.
The world had not fully recovered, but it had begun to gather again. If you found this interesting, please like, share, and follow for more.